fundamental concern, it seems to me, is one I fundamentally share, which is rationalism isn't enough. And it's, or let me put it another way.
Okay, but then two of you, can you both show me where it's obviously insufficient? Like
music.
But there's nothing. But again, so to say that there's more to life than being rational is not to say, and perhaps never to say, you need to run against rationality. You need to be irrational in order to get something good.
Let me express it a different way.
Yeah.
We haven't tried the purely rational approach yet, or we haven't tried it for very long.
Well, many of us have been trying for a couple of centuries at least.
Which is a blip.
Yeah.
I mean, the tiniest dot at the end of human evolution. So I think that a concern which Jordan has, and certainly a concern I have, is if we try this, we can think of all sorts of ways in which it can go wrong. If you take away all that supporting structure, you can think of any number of ways in which it can go wrong. And that I suppose that's at the root of the concern about where you might be taking us. Or to put it another way, if we enter the world that you would suggest, not everyone may necessarily come out as Sam Harris.
Well, give me one way where you think it can go wrong. And again, we can't forget your caveat, which you started with.
What if you're not very smart?
Right.
I don't mean a person.
So then you're basically saying that the stupid people need their myths. You know, we smart people on stage don't need them.
Right.
But
I actually am saying that to some degree. Look, if you're not exceptionally cognitively astute, you should be traditional and conservative. Because if you can't think well, you're going to think badly. And if you think badly, you're going to fall into trouble. And so it is definitely the case, and this has been what would you call a cliche of political belief for a long time. If you're not very smart, it's better to be conservative, because then you do what everyone else does. And generally speaking, doing what everyone else does is the path of least error moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean that rationality is unnecessary.
Nor does it mean that all conservatives are stupid.
It doesn't mean that either, right? Precisely. It doesn't mean
that either.
Very important
caveat.
But all conservative structures are not the same either, and that we have many warring and incompatible versions.
True. And this is where rationality actually does play its role. Although I don't think it's best conceptualized as rationality precisely, it's definitely the case that to take Douglas's point, that we need to be bound by our traditions, but we need to be judicious in their re-representation and update, and we have to do both.
This is what, in the dialogue on religion, this is what Schopenhauer says. He describes the tragedy of the clergy.
Yeah.
He pretty much says, look, if they don't believe it, they recognize it's a very useful metaphor, but they don't need to believe it. They tell it, and he says the tragedy of the clergy is they can never admit that what they're saying is just a metaphor.
Right. Is this before or after he threw his housekeeper down the stairs?
Look, we can all find flaws.
We all have skeletons in our closet. Yeah.
But yes, there is a way in which religion is what he describes as philosophy for the masses. And that if you recognize that most people are not going to spend their lives studying philosophy, they're not going to be reading about the differences between Leibniz and Kant, that religion has to do. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with that particularly, but there's a heck of an argument within there, which a lot of people will be living their lives in.
I don't think it's a good argument if you recall or just imagine what it's like to be a child, especially from the perspective. I mean, I have two young girls, and they're very smart young girls. I mean, they're smart, but one of them is 4.5 years old and knows almost nothing, right? So she knows what I and my wife and our society tell her at some level. I mean, at what point is she going to think for herself about these fundamental questions? And I mean, she's currently spending half the day dressed up like Batgirl or Catwoman, right? So if I told her that these superheroes were real she would believe that for the longest time. And if we lived in a cult that thought they were real, or a whole society that by dint of its geographic or linguistic isolation managed to maintain a conversation about, in this case, Batgirl and Catwoman, that they were real and that it was absolutely important to honor them, and you'd burn in hell if you failed to do this.
Well,
we would be meeting fully grown adults who believe this sort of thing.
But it seems to me, Sam, that you bring up the superhero thing quite a bit, so I think I'll go after that directly.
Yeah.
So
then I want.
Okay,
I love superheroes.
Okay, so you make the case in A Moral Landscape that.
Wow. Sam Harris got them both chomping at the bit, right? They're ready to go. Jordan Peterson is ready, and Douglas Murray goes after you. I want to be next. But this whole idea, Jordan Peterson initially basically saying that that if you are cognitive, let's say, with the wording that he used, you're cognitively impaired somewhat. In other words, you're not really smart, but stupid, sort of. That maybe you ought to be conservative because that's a path of least resistance, or you ought to join a religion because that's what most people are doing. At least you can follow. And when most people are going in a certain direction, maybe they're going in the right direction. Boy, do I freaking disagree with that. I would say that it's the smart people that are religious. It is the smart people that follow something in terms of those things, whatever religion they follow. I think I would venture to say it is the people that are not as smart. And sometimes just because you're an elite and you've studied a lot and you've gone to college, you have the degrees, doesn't mean you're intelligent or smart. We're talking about common sense. To look around the world and to say that this was just happened, that to me is stupidity. That to me shows no common sense whatsoever. That the order in the world is being controlled by something or some entity rather than just being out there in chaos and limbo. That to me is a more rational idea. But Sam Harris would say no. And then you've got Jordan Peterson basically saying, if you're cognitively impaired, maybe conservatives are stupid. I mean, and then Douglas came right inside there to sort of save him a little bit, at least save himself, to say that doesn't mean that all religious people are stupid, all conservative people are stupid. And I wouldn't say that all liberal and leftist people are stupid. No, I think they're very cunning, very smart. They know exactly what they want to do. They want to destroy conservatism and religiosity within the masses. That's what they're intent on doing. Anyways, folks, let's get back to more of the discussion. This is what we have on tap for you today, folks. You're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my political prescription from my political perspective of what happens when you have Sam Harris, Douglas Murray, Jordan Peterson talking social media, religion, government, politics, culture, all those come crashing together. Let's get back to more of the interview right now.
Is real, because the ideal that you define an ideal is real, and the ideal is whatever maximizes well-being and gets us away from hell. You said not only is that real, you also say that's the fundamental axiom. That's the claim in the moral landscape. So you do make a claim that there is a real ideal. And I would say...
I wouldn't necessarily put it that way, but we are in a circumstance where things can matter, right? Consciousness is the condition in which things can matter, where there can be a range of experiences, some of which are very, very bad. If the word bad means anything, they're bad. And some of which are very, very good, if the word good means anything. And we are navigating in that space. We can't help but navigate or seek to navigate in that space.
Right, absolutely.
And religion is one form of conversation about that navigation problem. And I would argue
let's go back to the
well,
ideal.
often diluted one.
Well, Jordan rolls his sleeves up.
Batgirl.
He means business now.
Batgirl.
But
Batgirl and Catwoman are approximations to a higher ideal. That's what they are.
And to return to this with a biblical idea, I'm fairly sure from personal experience that a lot of parents are perfectly content with bringing their children up vaguely within the story they've inherited. And at some point, the children realize that the fairy doesn't bring them money when their teeth fall out. And at some point, maybe around the same time or a bit later, they discover that Santa Claus doesn't really come down the chimney. And at some point, they realize that actually the whole religious thing is a kind of metaphor, but it's got them through the formative years in some way, often with terrible damage along the way. I concede that. But also with something else. And I'm struck by the number of people, and this is why I share some of what I think is Jordan's concern about the possibility of the world you're envisaging, which is, I can think of a lot of parents now, in my country and other countries as well, who I'm just very struck. They themselves are kind of baby boomer or 60s atheists, humanists, whatever. And I start to notice, for instance, that they're enrolling their children in Christian schools. And I say to them, why are you doing this? And they have fairly coherent arguments along the lines of the one I've just had. Look, I don't particularly believe this myself, but I think it's a pretty good way to bring up the kids. It's a structure of a kind. And I'm not sure, I can find all sorts of flaws in that. But enough people are doing it that it's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, well, I would say yes. It speaks to a real failure of imagination and effort in the secular community to produce truly non-embarrassing alternatives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, what Douglas brought up there is so very important, where he was saying that he's meeting with parents, basically, from the 60s and 70s, atheists, agnostics, maybe not really into the religious movement as much. I mean, somewhat there, but not, with oomph. But that they're starting to put their kids, as he said, into Christian schools. You're seeing this a lot happening across the board. You're seeing it with families from India that are in England or in the America, putting their kids into schools that are like more, Hindu, tradition, Hindu teachings along with the secular teachings. You're seeing Muslim parents in America put them in Islamic schools or whatever. You're seeing Christian parents, like Douglas was saying, put them into Christian schools, Catholic schools, parochial schools. A lot of parents, putting kids into private schools. So many people of faiths across, kind of mainly Christians, homeschooling. Why? Because they're seeing some erosion of something that's some stability, something that's, that's going to give guidance, going to give stability, going to give cohesion, going to give, a lane in which children can basically, go down and learn the fundamentals, and not have all this other crap, being taught to them. And so they want their values, their religious values, their personal belief systems, whatever they may be, they want those to be incorporated along with the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, the science, all of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And everybody is going to go. Some people might say, you know what, we want to go into, a private school, private schooling. We want to go into a religious schooling. We want to do homeschooling. It's up to the parents. But for some reason, parents are looking at that and saying that the structure that perhaps they didn't need to have back then when things weren't as complex and all this kids weren't being bombarded by all this outside crap. And now parents are saying, wow, there's things here that we don't like. And where can we put our kids into a space where they're going to be free from those things that we don't like and only go down this path? That's, I think, what's happening out there. And take that for what it's worth. But anyways, folks, you've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you've already done so, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. If you like our content, like, share, and follow us. Comment below what you think. Take a look at our other video links above and below. My final thought is always, when you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.